much information as we possibly can. Let me first start off by thanking a couple of people. Detective John Gordon and Marvin Kirkpatrick are the lead investigators and have been working around the clock, literally, on this and other critical investigations that they've been involved in since this occurred on December 6th. So, John, I want to recognize you and thank you for all the work you put into this. And John will be available for questions afterward if you should have anything that I'm not answering or anything that needs to be cleared up. I want you to know that we're moving as fast as we possibly can on this investigation. There are those who think that these things can be done in a snap and information should be flowing like the Jordan River. It just is not that way. These things take time. We want to verify information. We want to make sure that statements are accurate and that I'm getting the best information possible so that I can relate it to the community, as well as the city manager and the people I'm accountable to. The California Department of Justice has been and continues to be an invaluable asset locally here. I can't emphasize that enough. There is some talk about removing the lab from our region. That would be a tragic mistake on the state's part. We depend on them heavily to do the forensic examinations of the evidence at the scene, as well as reports such as toxicology that we get back from them. So that's important. I also want to thank the other CERT team investigators who, again, spent a few sleepless nights trying to get the information to us and make sure that it's accurate as possible. There's been a considerable amount of inaccurate information that's been put out by various people for whatever reasons. It doesn't really matter to me. The information will only come out from here. That is, we are responsible for the information and we'll put it out directly. I hope this clears up some of the inaccuracies that have been put out. This incident should have been over at the traffic stop. If Clayton Lazinski had stopped for the CHP officer, none of this would have taken place. Clayton in his interview apologized for his behavior. And I think that's a relevant topic. It doesn't mean he's necessarily a bad guy. All that means is that he made a bad choice, and as a result, this incident unfolded. In taped interviews, one of his passengers said that Clayton knew he had a warrant or thought he had a warrant out of Illinois and that he was running because of it. Another passenger said that he was paranoid and he was fearful of being arrested, and that's why he ran. Clayton himself said that he was running from the police because he thought that he owed money, $100,000 worth of product and other things, to a organized crime guy out of the Modesto area. And as a result, he said he thought that they were using the police to help him. Probably part of his delusional state, I don't know. Two different civilian witnesses believe that he fired at officers. One said that he two-hand, shoulder, eye level, pointed the gun at officers who were pursuing him. Another person said that he actually thought that he was firing his gun at officers. That did not turn out to be the case. Lazinski thought he had a warrant out of Illinois, out of Henry County, Illinois, for a probation violation. He had absconded from probation where he was on probation for trafficking cannabis. That actually was not true. They just dropped the probation rather than seek a warrant for his arrest. I want to be very clear. This is a tough job. We ask our young men and women to make decisions in microseconds. And we expect them to be right 100% of the time. We ask them to make these decisions while they're running with 30-plus pounds of gear on in critical incidents and chaotic scenes when they only have partial parts of information. But we expect them anyway to be 100% right. We look at the justification, both legal and policy, for the shootings. We look at the context and the environment that these shootings took place in. And we look for the proportionality of our response in these shootings. And then we are harder on our own people than anybody could possibly be. We judge that with clear eyes in understanding the policy and also understanding the context of policing. We understand that it must be legally justified, but also must be morally justified. We understand that they must be within policy, but they also must be safe and keep the community safe. So it's in this environment that we take a good critical look at what took place. And in Monday Morning Quarterback, these incidents, not just officer-involved shootings, but also any use of force where someone is injured. It's my job as chief of police to make sure this investigation is objective, that the policy is clear, and that the training is thorough for our people. I'm responsible for that. I'm accountable to the city manager and the citizens of this city. I want you to know that I do have some concerns based on what I'm seeing at this point. That is not for this portion of the investigation. That will come later. There will be a shooting review board. Ultimately, this entire incident will be forwarded to the Chief's Advisory Panel in its entirety. They will sit with me and we will tear this thing apart and we will look at the policies and the training as well as and compare that to the incident. So we will take a long, deep, hard look at this incident to make sure that Eureka police officers are performing in the best way possible. Now, having said all that, we are not at this point saying that anybody did anything wrong. I want to make sure that we were within policy, and that will take time, effort, and energy to do. Second part of this that I believe is critically important is that today, we've been working on this for some time, but today we are launching the transparency portal portion of the Eureka Police Department's website. This portal will initially start off with 3 items. First one will be the PowerPoint that I'm giving you today. And not only should media have it, but the general public should have it and be able to look at it themselves in its entirety without editing and without editorializing on this. Second thing that will be posted is the McLean Officer-Involved Shooting Executive Summary. It's a multi-page document, and some of this isn't suitable for young readers because there are language. This is part of an investigation that is very raw. That'll be posted up there, as well as the video of one of our officers kicking a juvenile. That will be posted on that website also. This was, as you know, the subject of a lawsuit between the city and the North Coast Journal and Thad Greenson. And so this will be posted on there once we are able to get the exact timestamps and get it uploaded. Hopefully that will be later today at some time. There will also be a portal where we can post any relevant policy that the community has a question about, such as use of force policy, foot pursuit policies, car chase policies, you name it. Some policies are exempt under the state code, but for the most part, many of our policies will be posted in this location, as well as PRA requests that are made to the city. We'll try to post most of it so that people can have access to it in a fair way. My goal is to create as much transparency and fairness and be as accountable as possible to the public, and this is just one step toward that. This has been discussed at the Chief's Advisory Panel, and as well as with the city attorney and the city leaders. So let's go into the case itself. Probably pretty small for you to see, but there's a lot of information, and you have it in front of you. The first report of shots fired was at 16:51 hours and 15 seconds. That was by 3B34. He wasn't saying he's code 4, that's his call sign, 34. And he was reporting shots fired. Shortly after that, at approximately 16:51.56 hours, Officer Linfoot got in the air and described that there was a carjacking, that the person had taken the car. The car was abandoned at 16:52.28 hours, and an officer got on the air and said he's still, quote, holding the gun. The vehicle was abandoned in the middle of the intersection at 6th and B, right behind the police station here. The suspect is at 16:52:44 hours at 5th and B Street, where officers are screaming at him to drop the gun. This is after he had already collapsed behind the car. So you can see from this, and medical was staged, by the way, at 16:53:15 hours. The entire time from when Linfoot had eyes on to when medics were called was 3 minutes and 19 seconds. That's a relevant time. That is the portion where EPD was involved. So let's talk about by the numbers. There were 42 rounds fired by EPD officers. All of those were .40 caliber rounds. There were no AR-15 shell casings found at the scene. And no officers reported shooting an AR-15. There were 27 strikes on the target car. 2 of those were possibly exit points. There were 14 strikes on other objects, such as walls and vehicles where the car had traveled. We have 3 strikes that are unaccounted for. We know from the officer statements that one probably went straight down B Street. The other 2 we're not sure where they are. And we found 42 shell casings at the scene. So we accounted for all of the shell casings in most of the strikes that were spent. Officer Linfoot was the first officer to engage the suspect. He fired 16 rounds with 1 unspent round that was ejected from his handgun on malfunction. All of those were in the carport at Soul Savers. Officer Nance fired 5 rounds, all on the west side of the building of Soul Savers. I'll get into the details on this in a second. Officer Jansen fired 20 rounds, 15 on the west side of Soul Savers, 2 on 6th Street, and 3 on B Street. Detective Harpin fired 1 round on B Street. It is worth noting that it takes about 1/3 of a second, give or take a couple hundred milliseconds, to fire a round and for the gun to recycle. So in a very short period of time, in seconds, you can empty a complete magazine. So at 16:39 hours, Officer Walker from the CHP observes a white pickup truck turn onto Commercial from 5th Street. The driver, later identified as Lazinski, is trying to conceal the fact that he isn't wearing a seatbelt. CHP decided to pull a U-turn and try to stop him. This is a picture of Clayton Lazinski after the incident. Officer Walker makes a U-turn to try to initiate a traffic stop. Lazinski runs the stop sign at Commercial and 4th, and Walker loses sight of the vehicle and it pulled into the Best Western. Officer Walker drives onto 4th Street, entrance of Best Western, and relocates the Dodge. He sees females walking south of the parking lot from the Dodge pickup truck. Officer Walker then sees Lazinski walking towards the Redwood wing, and Officer Walker runs after Lazinski shouting, "Taser, taser, taser." Lazinski confronts 2 maintenance workers on the 2nd floor and gets into a physical altercation, displays his firearm and tells them he is armed. Lazinski passes the workers and jumps over the wall of the complex, running south on Commercial. 16:42 hours, EPD dispatch receives a call for the agency assist to locate a fleeing armed suspect. Officers Hill and Jansen are dispatched to respond. Officer Jansen, Hill, and Linfoot arrive at Best Western and are informed Lazinski has a handgun. They are told Lazinski was seen running southbound on California Street. They immediately left. This was ultimately the gun that was recovered. And you can see from the photograph that the hammer is pulled back. It's a .45 caliber handgun, 1911. Officer Linfoot locates Lazinski jumping a fence headed toward A Street. Officer Nance and Jansen also see Lazinski jumping the fence. They are out in the alley between California and A and 6th and 7th, shout, "Police, stop." Lazinski looks at Officer Nance but continues over the fence toward A Street. Officer Linfoot sees Lazinski on A Street and pursues him on foot across A into the Soul Savers parking lot. Officer Linfoot shouts, "Stop, stop." But Lazinski continues to run toward the covered breezeway of Soul Savers, heading towards the EPD. Lazinski locates a red Mazda sedan idling with the keys in the ignition and the doors unlocked. The employee sees police chasing Lazinski and moves out of the way. Lazinski gets into the car and steals it, climbing into the driver's side. At 16:51 hours, Officer Linfoot draws his firearm, commanding Lazinski to stop, and sees Lazinski point a firearm at him over the steering wheel. So what happened is Lazinski's in the driver's seat. He brings the gun up over the top of the steering wheel and points it at Linfoot. So at that point, at 16:51 hours and 15 seconds, Linfoot fires rounds into the vehicle as he steps backwards and to his right to create space and distance. Linfoot trips and falls on the curb, there's about a 6-inch curb there, backwards into an office doorway and continues firing into the driver's side of the vehicle as it accelerates past him. Linsky reported that it was at this confrontation that he was struck by a bullet. Linfoot fired 16 rounds in total. 16:51 hours, Officer Linfoot and Jansen broadcast shots fired. This is a picture of the car that Lazinski stole from Soul Savers. You can see the dowels that show the direction of travel of the bullet as well as where they struck. Continuing, Lazinski drove the Mazda westbound out of the breezeway after, quote, burning rubber and headed directly towards Officer Nance. It's at this location that Nance felt Lazinski was driving directly at him in an attempt to strike him with the vehicle. Nance fired rounds and attempted to move out of the way simultaneously. Nance fired 5 rounds. You can see from this picture the strikes on the front of the car. You see one directly in the hood, as well as both lower parts of the windshield and the top windshield. Lazinski then drove by Officer Jansen. Officer Jansen fired rounds into the Mazda and continued firing as Lazinski turned eastbound on 6th Street. Officer Jansen fired approximately 15 rounds at this location. This is a picture of the back of the car where you see more dowels as well as strikes. And then you can also see the strikes that appear to be coming from behind on the side of this car. This is the building across from the exit of Soul Savers across the street. You'll see the circles which show 3 holes in the wall, as well as 1 in the back of a pickup truck. This picture shows two bullet holes, probably exit sites. You can't always tell. 16:52:28, the Mazda stalled and came to a stop on 6th Street, just west of B. Lazinski exited the vehicle. Officer Jansen broadcast, Lazinski still has the gun. He didn't say Lazinski, he said the suspect still has the gun. Lazinski approaches the driver of a Toyota Tacoma pickup on 6th, tells the driver to get out while holding the gun at shoulder level, at chest level. We believe this was an attempted carjacking. The driver accelerated away, and we interviewed him later. Lazinski now fled towards Hertz with the gun in his hand. At the southwest corner of 6th and B Street from EPD headquarters, he hears officers giving. He fires one round. He says, "I didn't." Lazinski, his body did not react to the force of the. He was not going to be able to fire any more rounds without putting people in jeopardy. Runs to the corner of 6th and B Street and continued following Lazinski on foot while the gun was still in his hand. Jansen fired 2 rounds at this location in a northwesterly direction. Lazinski rental lot, and Officer Jansen continued pursuing him on B towards 6th and fires at Lazinski 3 more times. Depicted in the photo here state that at this point Lazinski. Officer Jansen fired 3 rounds from this location, striking a heavy metal fence, which was his backdrop at Hertz rental car. At 16:53 hours, EPD had an ambulance to transport Lazinski. Lazinski had continued to cross the lot where he collapsed on 5th Street. American Stove Works and officers were able to finally take him into custody. At 16:57 hours, officer approached Lazinski and detained him while medics. That part of the incident. So what are the next steps? Are for us to complete the investigation. There's additional interviews to be done. There's re-interviews done with officers to clarify what took place. To my understanding, and then we also need to obtain the forensic evidence reports from the California Department of Justice. After that, we will conduct internal interviews in an internal affairs function, and that will go before a shooting review board to look at policy and training, and then after that, the whole thing will be packaged and forwarded to the Chief's Advisory Panel, where we'll look at the investigation, the policy, the training, and the transparency as a result. That's an overview of the incident as much as I have right now. If you have specific questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them. Pat?
You said officers had footage. Is that just the officers involved, or is that investigators too at this point?
The investigators have. Hank?
You said that there are some things in this that I think warrant further examination. You have some concerns based on what you're saying. Can you narrow down what those concerns are at which stage of this?
My concerns are severalfold, but the most important thing is the environment. So if you're shooting at a car that's fleeing from you, in the mind of that officer. Now the standard is objective reasonableness. He or she has to be objectively reasonable. bunch of criteria in our policy. So we need to do a deeper dive into that to find out what was in their mind that took place. Objective reasonableness, by the way, is from a typical officer in this situation. So what was he thinking, or what were they thinking as they moved through this incident at specific time frames within the incident?
After going step by step on what how the event took place, I believe that some of your officers were in their right, doing their job well when it comes down to shooting that many, as many shots as they fired. Some shot 15, 16 bullets, some fired one. Do you feel like your officer?
Well, I'm not going to get into justification at this point. I believe certainly some, if not all, of the officers were justified in different parts. So when somebody points about a second and a half to 2 seconds to complete, and you are trained to shoot until the threat is stopped. So as long as you have that threat, you're going to continue firing until you believe you or the public is out of harm's way. So as we tear this thing apart and go literally around it segment by segment, we'll evaluate it as we go. But I'm not ready at this point until we can get all of the statements, re-interview officers, and administrative interviews before we're ready to say this person.
And just to re-clarify, was the Clinton shot just once?
Just once, and it was again by Linfoot during the initial volley of gunfire.
Do you have a timeline on when the investigation will be completed on these next steps?
I don't, but we're talking in the near future, but these take time. John?
Having one of your most experienced detectives out during this department, how will that impact the department?
Well, that's been tough. I mean, we have a small investigative unit, so when you take your most senior detective out of the mix, that's pretty tough to do, and especially the guy that handles most of the officer-involved meetings. So having done that, we took a look at it last weekend. We had a police psychologist come up here and sit down and do a debrief with all of our personnel, both dispatchers, and then did one-on-ones with each of the officers except one who is away on vacation at this time. And the psychologist has cleared them for duty and will go back to duty effective tomorrow.
That's all four?
No, 3 of the 4.
Okay.
One's not here, he hasn't been debriefed yet, so that will come at a later time.
Process.
He'll go through that process, then we'll make a determination based on that and other things, and once we get to that point. That's Officer Jansen. He had a pre-scheduled.
Two eyewitnesses, two witnesses who say that they saw point the weapon at officers. What about do you have any other corroborating evidence that he did in fact point the weapon?
Corroborating evidence, no. Officer statements. And John, were there any witnesses at Soul Saber? One of the things I might point out, and if you look at the configuration of this gun, pulled back, this is a 1911. In order to do that, you have to manually pull that hammer back. This just doesn't cycle on itself. It's a single action firearm. And so that's part of the process of the investigation. You have to physically do this. You pull it back and then press the trigger and the hammer will fall forward. So it was never, there was a round never chambered. So in this firearm, you have to pull the slide back in order to put a round up in the firing chamber. And so one of it wasn't seated correctly, or else he just hadn't loaded it correctly.
To shoot.
I believe so. When you hold a gun two-handed eye level at a police officer, you're intending to do something, and I would guess that would be shooting.
Would the hammer not have fallen on the empty chamber if he had pressed the trigger?
It would.
It would have.
So the question then becomes, you know, when you have a witness saying he was firing at officers, how many times did he press that trigger and then consciously pull it? Yes.
And what triggered that thought that we
Chasing a guy with a gun, you're hearing all these rounds going off. Several of the officers reported in their interviews that they believed they heard two different caliber of guns. It turned out not to be the case, especially when you look at acoustics in terms in covered overheads, such as the breezeway, soul saver behind buildings, echoes, and so forth. Again, initially in the beginning, it can get confusing. And
do you feel that there's enough training to sort of prevent that way of thinking?
I don't know that you can. A lot of these guys and gals shoot an awful lot and are used to firearms. I mean, better than I ever will be in terms of handling a weapon. So, in their opinion, in the fog of war, if you will, this can be a tough thing to decipher. So, I don't know that you can train that out. We want them to be as accurate as possible, that individualized for them. That.
You said that there's no evidence to corroborate Lindquist's statement that Lisinski pointed the firearm at him from the Mazda. Was he wearing a body cam at the time?
And he was in lineup, so the body cameras work this way. You have to plug those things in and then get on the computer and log on, and then to activate the body camera. And Brian can maybe address more of this. He's the body camera expert. So when they're sitting in lineup and they hear this cover call, code 3 cover, they all went running out of line to try to help out. They had not logged the computer system yet, and so that his was not activated at the time.
In that,
Brian, is that, you want to clarify that at all?
It was not powered on. Lincoln was not powered on. So to save battery and not to record anything during briefing, they often power them down. It's never happened.
okay, and that negates the ability.
There were two other body cameras. Well, there were many cameras that were recording. We're talking about specifically recording the census camera. Dustin has served a search warrant earlier in the day and had been recording for 8 hours straight. And that battery ran down because it was obviously the end of the shift. And then the third camera was Officer Jansen's, who was recording.
So, I'm sorry, Nance's camera recorded part of the incident but then shut off during?
No, it was dead.
It was dead.
Lindquist was the one that had the shot that hit Clinton, right? That said, in this body camera not working, don't you feel that that's going to bring questions into whether the question wasn't working?
It may, but there's not much, limitations to technology. When you guys go out in the field, every time I do an interview, you guys are swapping out batteries in your camera. you know, sometimes midstream because technology fails. This can only do so much, and these cameras are fallible. However, that was recording all day long, and on search warrant, we got some guns off of a kid that was tearing us up. So, as a city, so applaud him for having his camera on. These cameras are only going to last, what, eight or 9? Annie?
We're talking about cameras, any surveillance video from the Soul Savers, from you guys in the back of the parking lot, or even by businesses?
I'll let Jan.
Well, Soul Savers does have surveillance on there, however, their place maintains the cameras, and their camera quit working on October 27th, I believe. So, they didn't have the footage.
And considering this was in Old Town, during rush hour, or getting out of work, do you feel like any pedestrians were in danger with all those 42 shots that were fired?
Well, certainly anytime you're firing rounds in a urban environment, even though this really isn't urban, it's rural, but it's obviously the middle of our city, there's always some level of risk. From looking at the photos that I showed you, the officers did a pretty good job as far as the backdrop is concerned. Errant rounds weren't fired at multiple directions. The rounds were fired with a backdrop that was pretty clear, whether it be it a metal or the vehicle itself. We did not get reports from people that they almost got hit. Now, having said that, it's still one of the concerns that we have is choosing your shots wisely and making sure that your shots are on target.